learn history in our school, this is the history we learn. Firstly, Indian history begins with the Indus Valley civilization, which is from 3500 to 1900 BC. Second, there is the Aryan invasion in 1500 BC, followed by the Vedic period, which is till 600 BC. And finally, we have the post-Vedic and Buddhist India, 600 BC onwards. However, this is not our traditional history. Our traditional history is contained in the Puranas, and that is divided into two parts. The Mahabharata event is the defining point in the Puranas. So whatever happened before the Mahabharata is written in the Puranas in the past tense, and whatever happened after the Puranas is written after the Mahabharata is written in the future tense. And nowhere in that is there any reference to any people called Aryans. It is now both these two versions tally with each other for the period after 600 BC. But for the period before 600 BC, there is a difference between the two periods. That is, the official version that we learn talks about the Aryan invasion, whereas the tradition knows nothing about this Aryan invasion. According to the Aryan invasion, a race of foreign invaders called Aryans entered India from the northwest, bringing with them the Sanskrit language and Vedic culture. Now, if we go to the traditional history in the Puranas state that a period of 1015 or 1050 years lapsed between the birth of Parikshit and the rule of Mahapadmananda. So this takes the Mahabharata war to around 1500 BC or so. This is not the traditional date. Traditionally, people believe it took place in 3100 BC, but this is the date that we actually get if we study the Puranas. Now, before the Mahabharata war, the Puranas record the names of over 90 generations of kings who ruled different parts of northern India, taking this back to the first king Manu Vaivaswat. And this, if you date it, it goes back to the 3rd or 4th millennium BC, that is 3000 BC and earlier. And there are other references to even earlier kings before Manu. Now, why is this traditional history recorded in the Puranas accepted by modern historians only for the period after 600 BC, but not for the period before 600 BC? You see, after 600 BC, the Puranas are accepted as reliable sources for history. This is because they have other independent sources which corroborate them. That is the Buddhist and Jain texts within India, the detailed accounts found in the Greek, Persian and Chinese texts. Greeks, Persian and Chinese visited India in ancient times, and they have left records. So those also tally with what is given in the Puranas and the Buddhist and Jain texts. And finally, we have the first datable inscription in India in the Ashoka pillars. Now, in the case of other civilizations like the Egyptian and all that, we have inscriptions which are scientifically dated to 3000 BC and beyond. So we know that what was there at that time. Whereas in India, the oldest that we have is the Ashoka pillars, which can be scientifically dated. Before that, we don't have any datable inscriptions which can confirm our historical accounts. Now, for this reason, the history after 600 BC is accepted, the Puranic descriptions. But before 600 BC, the history is not accepted simply because the details given in the Puranas contradict the Aryan invasion theory, which is treated as an irrefutable fact. Now, what is the Aryan invasion theory? This history treats the Aryan invasion as one more invasion like the later historical invasions. We know in our history there was the Greek invasion, the Persian, the Arab, Mughal, and afterwards the Europeans came to India and they colonized the country. Now, this Aryan invasion is one more invasion which took place before all these other invasions. That is the way we are taught history. But in each of these other cases, we know the identity of the invaders. Who were they? They were Greeks, they were Persians, they were Arabs, Mughals and Europeans. We know where they came from, which country they came from. We know who were the leaders in the invasions. For example, Alexander led the Greek invasion. Muhammad bin Qasim led the Arab invasion. Babar led the Mughal invasion. We know about Robert Clive and Alphonse Dupleix. We know all these people who were actually historical figures during these other invasions. And these pertain to more recent events which took place, say, from after the period of Ashoka to just 300 years ago when the Europeans started coming to India, 300 or 400 years ago. Yet, no one treats these invasions as relevant to present day history. When you're discussing Indian politics of the present day, no one talks about these invasions, the Greek invasion or the Persian, or even the Arabic or Mughal invasion. On the other hand, the Aryan invasion theory is a totally new theoretical event. That is, it is not recorded anywhere before 300 years ago. It is supposed to have taken place thousands of years ago in prehistorical times. That is, it should have no relevance in present times. And yet, it is the basis for extremely divisive politics in India. That is, South India. For example, in Tamil Nadu, they talk about Dravidians, about them being Dravidians, Aryan invaders coming from outside. Or in North India, or in tribal areas, they talk about the upper caste being Aryans and the lower castes or the tribals being non-Aryans, they being the natives who were invaded by these Aryans. And this has made the basis of so much divisive politics in India. At the same time, India's ethos, its Hindu historical ethos, is also treated as being of foreign origin. This happens to such a great extent. For example, if any of you saw the Shyam Benegal's documentary on TV, Bharat Ek Khoj, which was about the discovery of India, there he actually shows Aryans looking like sort of gypsies or something. They enter the Indus Valley, they said they rob people, and he's shown as if all these events are recorded. And then when he talks about the Islamic invasion, he says, ye to kuch hua hi nahi hai. So this is the strange way in which we are taught history. Now when this Aryan invasion was not recorded anywhere, where did this idea come from? Where did it suddenly come from that there was such a thing as Aryans who entered India and all? People don't know usually what it is. They assume that this is something which is also part of recorded history. Actually, this theory originated when the Britishers and the Europeans came to India and established their colonies. When they came here, they discovered that the languages of North India are related to the languages of Europe. They found Sanskrit was very closely related to Greek and Latin. Later, they examined the other languages of Europe, English, German, Russian, and they found out all those languages are related to Sanskrit and to the North Indian languages. Now, these languages, they started the study of comparative linguistics. And after that, they decided that all these languages belong to one family, which was named the Aryan or Indo-European family of languages. Now, where did these languages originated? They speculated that these languages originated in South Russia, and from there they spread to other parts of the world, including India. Now, this whole thing is based on speculation, based on only one fact, that they discovered the relationship between North Indian languages and European languages. On the basis of this, they gave the name Aryan or Indo-European to this language family, and then they decided that the Aryans came from outside. So this is the sole fact on which the whole Aryan invasion theory is based, which we are taught as historical fact. Now, after this was decided, they started examining the Rig Veda. The Rig Veda is the oldest, not only the oldest Sanskrit text, it is the oldest text in any Aryan or Indo-European language in the world. So they decided that this text will give some proof about the Aryans coming from outside India. So then they started examining the Rig Veda and trying to find proof in it. They started searching for clues showing that the Aryans had come from outside India. So that has become a very big industry, the discovery of the Aryan invasion in the Rig Veda. Now, till then, the Harappa Mohenjo-daro had not been discovered. This was discovered in the early 20th century, by which time the Aryan invasion theory had been established. So, when they discovered these sites, Harappan and Harappa Mohenjo-daro sites, and they discovered that these sites pertain to 3000 BC and earlier. So, automatically, because the date of the Aryan invasion had already been decided, 1500, so automatically these sites became non-Aryan or pre-Aryan. There was nothing in the sites which showed whether they were Aryan or non-Aryan, but because the theory had already been decided, they decided that these sites were pre-Aryan. One must understand the crucial nature of this theory. This theory is taught in modern history books as if it is actual recorded history, but it is based on nothing at all, because before the Europeans came and studied the languages of North India, no one had any idea that there was such a thing as Aryans, that there was such a thing as Aryan languages, let alone that there was an Aryan invasion of India. So it is based wholly and solely on the speculations which followed the discovery of the linguistic relations between the languages of India, Iran, Central Asia and Europe. It has no actual basis whatsoever, either in any recorded historical text or tradition anywhere in the world, whether in India or outside, or in any evidence discovered from any archaeological excavations within or outside India. The correctness or other of this entire pre-600 BC history of India, as taught in history books, therefore wholly and solely hinges on the correctness or otherwise of this theory. Therefore, it is essential to first understand what this theory is all about. See, we know now that they discovered this connection between North Indian languages and European languages, and they made up this theory. But what exactly are the basic postulates of this theory? There are four basic postulates of this theory. You have to understand what they are. The first is that the languages of Northern India, Iran, Central Asia, and Europe are related to each other as members of a language family, which is called Aryan or Indo-European. This is the first postulate of the theory. This family has been named Aryan or Indo-European as distinct from other language families like Dravidian, Semito-Hamitic, Ostric, Sino-Tibetan, etc. Second postulate is that all these languages, since they are related to each other, they must have descended from a common ancestor. Like we say Marathi, Hindi, etc. came from Sanskrit. So like that, all these languages which are related to each other must have come from some ancestral form. Now that ancestral form is not recorded anywhere. But the linguists, by linguistic reconstruction, they compared all the existing Aryan languages of India and Europe and other places, and they artificially reconstructed this language, which is called Proto-Indo-European. And they decided that all these languages are descended from that Proto-Indo-European language. That is the second postulate. The third postulate is this ancestral language must have been spoken in one particular place, because the Aryan languages are spread out from Sri Lanka to the south of India, because the South Indian languages are not Aryan, they are Dravidian languages. But to the south of India, the language of Sri Lanka, Sinhalese, is an Aryan language. So right from Sri Lanka to Scandinavia and Britain, the Aryan languages are spoken. So it cannot be possible that the original Proto-Indo-European language was also spoken all over this area. It must have been spoken in one particular area and then it spread everywhere. So that particular area is the Proto-Indo-European homeland. This is the third postulate. And finally, we have the fourth postulate, that this Proto-Indo-European homeland must have been in some central area between Sri Lanka and Scandinavia, and that is in South Russia and not in India. If it is not in India, that means the Rig Veda and the Vedic culture has come from outside, from South Russia. So it was brought into India from outside by Aryan invaders or immigrants. So this is the Aryan invasion theory. Now it must be remembered that according to this theory, even the Britishers are not native to Britain. They also went from South Russia. The Germans are also not native to Germany. But nowhere in those countries do they talk of an Aryan invasion of Britain by the ancestors of the British people, of the English people. It is only in India that this theory has been made into a political issue. Now these are the four postulates. Are they correct? Now most Indians who are opposed to this Aryan invasion theory, they oppose the very first postulate. They say there is no such thing at all as an Aryan or Indo-European family of languages. They say, because they don't like the idea. You are saying Sanskrit is related to German and English and Russian, but it is not related to our own Tamil and Santali. So they don't like this idea. But you can't reject an idea just because you don't like it. Actually, it is an absolute fact. The first postulate is absolutely correct. Now I'll give you some examples. You take the English word three. In Sanskrit it is three. In Russian it is three. In Irish it is three. In Greek and Latin it is threes. If you in Lithuanian it is threes. Whereas you compare the South Indian languages, you have Moonru, Mudu, Muji. All these you can make out it is some completely different thing. And this is the same thing. You see the Persian numbers: Yak, Du, Si, Chahar, Panj, Shish, Haft, Hasht, Nuh, Dah. You can make out the connection. You see the names for the relations. For example, father, mother, brother, sister, son, daughter. In Sanskrit, it is Pitar, Matar, Bhratar, Swasar, Sunu, Duhitar. And in Persian, it is Pidar, Madar, Biradar, Khasar, Hunu, and Duhitar. You can see all these things are there. You take the personal pronouns. In Sanskrit, English, you say we, you, and they. In Sanskrit, it is Vayam, Yuyam, and Te. In Sanskrit, you also have two other personal pronouns. Na means we, and Vah means you. Nas or Vas. And in Latin, it is Nos and Vos. So you see, whatever you, and this I'm just giving some single examples. When you examine these languages in the roots, you find that every part, even the verbal roots from which the words, the dhatu which the earlier speakers have spoken of, the dhatu or the verbal roots of the words, they are related in all these Aryan languages, whether it is Greek, Latin, English, or Sanskrit. Daudraps, means dewdrops. You just examine every word, you see the similarity between everything. Whereas it is not so in Tamil or this. For example, in India, there are now 12 branches of Aryan languages in the world. 2 of them are extinct languages which have been just discovered in archaeological inscriptions, and 10 are living branches. They are the Indo-Aryan, Iranian, Armenian, Albanian, Greek, Baltic, Slavic, Italic, Germanic, and Celtic. And the 2 extinct languages are Hittite and Tokharian. They have been found in excavation. They are not living languages today. Hittite has been found in Palestine and Turkey, and Tokharian has been found in Chinese Turkestan or Xinjiang. They have been found in inscriptions and all that. Those are not living languages today. So these are the 12 branches of Aryan languages. And in India, you find 6 different language families being spoken. One is the Aryan or Indo-European, which we have already said. It includes almost all the official languages of India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Afghanistan, and Iran, and some Central Asian republics. Whereas then you find the Dravidian language family, which has Tamil, Malayalam, Telugu, Kannada, Tulu, and some more languages. You find the Austric language family, which has Santali, Mundari, Khasi, Nicobaris. You find the Sino-Tibetan family, which has the Naga languages, Ladakhi, Lepcha of Sikkim, and various other languages. Then you find the Andamanese language spoken by the Andamanese tribals, which by itself is a language family. It is not related to any other language in the world. And you also find a similar language in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, known as Burushaski. This language is also not related to any language in the world. So in India, we have 6 families of languages being spoken. And all over the world, there are a total of 19 families. 6 of these, as I said, are found in India. So this is the first postulate. The second postulate, that is Indo-European languages must be descended from a common ancestral language. That also many Indians don't like. They say, why can't Sanskrit be that ancestral language? All these are because Indians have these theories that in ancient times we had a great civilization, which we did. But then they believe that these Vedic or Sanskrit people spread out all over the world, and they took with them the Sanskrit language and Hindu culture. So they say Hindu Sanskriti puri dunya mein phail gayi thi, the Sanskrit bhasha. So this Aryan theory, even if they accept it, they say, okay, even if we accept that European languages are Aryan languages, why can't it be that Sanskrit is the original Proto-Indo-European language? Why should you reconstruct a fake artificial language? But actually this is also wrong, because if you examine Sanskrit, what you learn today as Sanskrit is classical Sanskrit, standardized and fixed by Panini. If you see Vedic Sanskrit, it is completely different from classical Sanskrit. There are so many differences. I'll just give one word which will show you how different it is. What is the word, if any of you asked, what do you say in Sanskrit for night? Everyone will say Ratri, Ratra, Rat, something like that. This word is not there in the Rig Veda. It is there only in the last parts of the Rig Veda as a new word which has come into existence. In the Rig Veda, the word for night is Nakt. Nakt is related to night, German Nikt, Latin Noctus. So you see in the Rig Veda you find connections with the Western languages, and actual Sanskrit that we learn today has different words altogether. Like we will say Jal, Neer, Paniya. Sanskrit has a rich vocabulary, but all this is not there in the Vedas. The Vedas had a word was Ap, which is related to Persian Ab, for water, or it has Udak, which is related to almost all the other words, including water. The word water is also related to Udak. Russian word is Voda. So you see, if you go, there is a difference between Vedic Sanskrit and later Sanskrit. Now how can you say that, okay, Vedic Sanskrit must be the original language? Because see, now each of us knows our ancestors. I know who my father was, I know who was my grandfather, my great-grandfather. But at a certain point, I don't know who was there beyond that. So suppose I know only my great-grandfather, I don't know someone beyond that. Can I say that my great-grandfather was living since thousands of years, there was no one before him? So just as we know that Vedic Sanskrit is changed into classical Sanskrit, so obviously Vedic Sanskrit before that must have been a different form. So as you go behind, you will reach that Proto-Indo-European language which has been reconstructed by the linguists. Because there are many words, it has been constructed on sound linguistic. Of course, there may be slight errors here and there, but basically it is a scientific procedure by which they have reconstructed this Proto-Indo-European language. Now the third postulate of a common homeland. This is obvious now. If there was a Proto-Indo-European language, then it has to have one area. So that is what also cannot be rejected. Once you accept the first two, the third also has to be rejected. The only controversial point is the fourth, which says that India is not the homeland. Because see, that is not based on any scientific logic, it is based on arguments. Now this fourth postulate is not based on any, as I told you about the earlier 3 points, how they are based on very logical premises. But this fourth point is not based on any logical premises. It is based purely on speculations and dubious arguments, and not on any recorded data or anything of any kind, whether it is linguistic, textual, or archaeological. There is no evidence for this. So this is the only point on which the Aryan invasion theory is based. The first 3 points are right, first 3 postulates, but this fourth postulate is the one on which this Aryan invasion theory is based. It must be remembered that the Aryan invasion theory is a totally new theory, formulated only in the last 300 years, purely and solely on the basis of speculations and arguments about the location of the original homeland. It has no basis or support in any traditional textual or inscriptional source in India or anywhere else in the world. It is not based on or supported by any data or evidence from any archaeological excavation anywhere in the world. No trace of the Proto-Indo-European language has been found in any part of the world. No trace of the invading Aryans entering or on the way to India has been found anywhere by archaeologists. And the language of the Indus civilization is still unknown. There is no evidence whether it is Aryan or non-Aryan. So it is only these linguistic arguments which are the sole basis of the Aryan invasion theory. And so we have to examine those arguments. Are they right or are they wrong? Now the Aryan invasion theory is based only on arguments, and there are 2 categories of arguments. Firstly, we have the linguistic arguments. Arguments, not evidence, on the basis of which it was decided that the original homeland must not be in India, it must be somewhere outside. And secondly, it was decided that the Aryan languages, this is the linguistic argument. Secondly, you have the textual arguments. Once they decided that the Aryans had come from outside, it was necessary to find some evidence in the Rig Veda, which is the oldest text. So then there became a full industry trying to find out evidence from this. Even a small word in that was taken and it was given a meaning. For example, there is a word, anas. In one Rigvedic hymn, some enemy is criticized as anas. Now, anas means, according to all the Sanskrit scholars, it means someone who babbles, who does not talk clearly. But these people decided it means a nas, someone who does not have a nose or someone who has a flat nose. So from this they did the theory that when the Aryans came into India, they were like Europeans with long noses, whereas the Indian natives whom they conquered were people with flat noses. So that is why they refer to them as anas. So on the basis of this one word, which is found only once in the Rig Veda, they made up a whole story. So this is the way they have analyzed the Rig Veda. Now again, it must be noted that Aryan invasion theory is not based on anything except these linguistic arguments and these textual arguments. Thirdly, on the basis of these two, they have also tried to bring out a third set of arguments in which they try to identify archaeological sites as Aryan or non-Aryan. For example, the Indus Valley, they claim it is non-Aryan. Now, in this talk, I will be dealing only with this linguistic arguments because it is quite a detailed topic. So I will be dealing only with the linguistic arguments on the basis of which the Aryan invasion theory has been accepted. The textual and archaeological arguments could be a subject of a future talk. And then now actually all these years we have been learning about the Aryan invasion theory, but in the last 20 or 30 years, now there is a debate going on in internet circles between 2 theories. One is the AIT or the Aryan invasion theory, and one is the OIT or the out of India theory. So now for the first time a rival theory has come which is challenged the Aryan invasion theory. And I have written 3 books in which the third book I have given the final proof, which is so final that no one can challenge that the Aryans have gone out from India. So in opposition to these arguments, we have the out of India theory arguments, chronological, textual and linguistic, which absolutely prove the thing, and it is not based on speculation of this kind, it is based on a detailed this thing of the data. Actually, when I wrote my first book in 1993, it was referred to by Michael Witzel, who is the professor, head of the Sanskrit department of Harvard University. He criticized my book without seeing it, without even reading it, saying that there are many Indians in India who have now come up with this fundamentalist idea that Aryans did not come from outside. And he mentioned my name in that. So what I did was, in my second book, which was about the Rig Veda, I devoted one full chapter to this Michael Witzel, and I pointed out how in his analysis of the Rig Veda he has contradicted himself, how he has given false information, how he has contradicted himself on each page, so that there is no this thing. And then I gave the true proof in the Rig Veda, and I sent a copy to him. And I first contacted, I found out his email, I sent him a copy. I said, see, I have written a chapter criticizing you, can you reply to it? You will not believe it, after I sent it to him, within a few days, I was contacted through someone by another professor in Harvard University. And I was offered a free scholarship under Michael Witzel. And this is a fact, it is all this thing on the internet. And if I was willing to modify my views, if I was willing to be flexible in my views. Now the thing is, he could not challenge what I had criticized him for. So he brought up this thing. Now in the third book, I have given such detailed information that no one will be able to. And again, I have devoted 2 chapters in which I have completely exposed what nonsense has been written by Witzel. And Witzel, in case you know, in America there is now this thing going on between Indians and certain West American academicians. In the textbooks in America, when something is written about Judaism, the Jews are consulted. When something is written about Islam, the Muslims are consulted. But when they write about Hinduism, they don't consult the Hindus. They write anything that they want. So when something was written like this, all the Hindus got together and said, we also have a right to be consulted on this issue. So there was a body of academicians headed by Michael Witzel who opposed them. They went carried on a big signature campaign, and they managed to stifle the voice of the Hindus in India, in the USA. So this Michael Witzel is at the forefront of the Aryan Invasion Theory. And when I wrote my third book, he simply said, no, I don't want to talk about it. In my third book, I have given data, pages and pages of data. It is not just, I think it is like this, so do you agree? It is pages and pages of data from the Rig Veda and the Avesta. And this data can, if I am wrong, anyone can just point out, you have given false data, or they can show us, you have given this data, but this data is wrong. But no one dares to touch it because the data is absolute. It is not like taking one word on us and making up a story out of it. It consists of pages and pages and pages of data which all point in one direction, that the Aryans moved out from India and went to Europe and Central Asia and Iran. And no one has dared to challenge it. So there is this AIT versus OIT debate going on. So those are very detailed data things which I cannot give in today's talk. Today I will be only talking about the linguistic arguments. Again, let me add that this is not when I say that the Aryans, Indo-European languages went out of India. It does not mean that the Hindu culture went out or the Vedic culture went out, because most of what we know as Hindu today is either post-Vedic or it is something pertaining to inner parts of India, like South India, etc., which are not part of the Vedic culture. And even what is found in Europe, it is not Vedic culture also. What went out was the languages. The languages moved out from India. People went out taking those languages. They moved to different parts of the world, and those languages were adopted by those people. So it is a history of the languages, not of the religion or the culture. Not of the religion or the, as I said, culture it's not Hindu thing which has spread all over the world. Now the very first linguistic argument is the ancestral language is not Sanskrit but something else. So that means India cannot be the homeland. Now this is very peculiar. What is the background of this? When first this relationship was discovered between the North Indian languages and the languages of Europe, all the early Western theories decided that Sanskrit was the ancestral language. Therefore, India was the original homeland. German scholars and many European scholars have written books on this when the first discoveries were made of this relationship. But after some time, when it became clear that Vedic Sanskrit was not the original language, it was also evolved from another language which their linguists reconstructed. This triggered an opposite reaction. And the very fact that Sanskrit was not the ancestral language automatically was construed to mean that India could not be the original homeland. So after that, all the theories concentrated on trying to find the original homeland somewhere. Where could it be? And all kinds of theories came up. And finally, many theories like South Russia, Eastern Europe, or Anatolia. Anatolia is Turkey. So these were the various homelands suggested. But Indian scholars reacted to this by insisting, no, Sanskrit is only the original homeland. is the original language. Therefore, India is the original homeland. But both sides ignore the fact that just as Vedic Sanskrit is different from the reconstructed ancestor, so is every other known or reconstructed language, and much more so than Vedic Sanskrit. If Sanskrit is not the Proto-Indo-European language, nor is Russian, so how can South Russia be the homeland? So there is no sense in that logic. In fact, the Vedic language is still much closer to the Proto-Indo-European language than any other Indo-European language. For example, Child, who was one of the earliest writers on this, he has given a list of 72 cognate Proto-Indo-European words, that is, which are found in many branches. Now, of these 72 words, Sanskrit has got 70 words, Greek has got 48, Germanic 46, Latin 40, Celtic 25, Baltic 23, and Slavic only 16. Slavic is the branch to which Russian belongs. Now, only 16 if the Proto-Indo-European language was in South Russia, they should have retained more words. Secondly, grammatically, Lockwood points out that Sanskrit has 3 genders, masculine, feminine, and neuter in the verbs, nouns. It has 3 numbers, single, dual, and plural. Like aham means I, avam means we two, and vayam means we. So like that, it has 3 numbers and 8 cases. Now, this is the fullest representation of the Indo-European system. That is, even the Proto-Indo-European language which they have reconstructed has 3 genders, 3 numbers, and 8 cases. Whereas if you see Latin, Greek, or any other language, they have lost some of the numbers or some of the cases, the original case. In Sanskrit only represents the original situation close to Proto-Indo-European. Also in the system of accents, like Vedic Sanskrit and classical Sanskrit, there is one difference, one of the many differences is this of pitch accents. Sanskrit is just a language, you must be learning Sanskrit, so you don't have to learn the accent of any word. But in Vedic Sanskrit, the word has an accent. Suppose there is vayama, so it can be vayama with a high tone on va, or it can be a vayama with a high tone on ya, and the word meaning changes. This system is not found in classical Sanskrit, it is found in Vedic Sanskrit. It is also found in Greek and partially in Lithuanian. So, but it is found fully only in Sanskrit. And as Griffith puts it, the Vedic language, we see the roots and shoots of the languages of Greek and Latin, of Celt, Teuton, and Slavonian. That is, so many words are there. You know that they are Aryan languages, Aryan or Indo-European words, simply because you find them in Sanskrit. For example, there may be a German word and there may be a Greek word. You can't make out the relationship between them. But both of those words, when you connect them with one particular Sanskrit word, you can make out, those 2 words are related. For example, second part is mythology. Now, what has been retained? It is not the Hindu religion which went, but certain myths, Vedic mythology is there. Vedic gods are different from, Puranic gods. There are Agni, Mitra, Rudra, Maruts, and Ashwinis. These are the gods of the Vedas. Now, these are these myths, all these gods have representatives in the mythologies of Greece, Germany, Lithuania, and all the other countries, Hittite. And as Griffith points out, the deities, the myths, and the religious beliefs and practices of the Veda throw a flood of light upon the religions of all European countries before the introduction of Christianity. That is, just as in language, Sanskrit represents the oldest form, in mythology also it represents the original form. That is, if you want to reconstruct Proto-Indo-European mythology, the gods, the myths, it is the Vedic mythology which gives you the perfect picture. For example, all the European mythology have numerous elements in common with Vedic mythology. So if you compare Vedic and Greek mythology, you will find so many common elements. If you compare Vedic and German mythology, you will find so many common elements. But if you compare Greek and German, you won't find any. Or you may find 1 or 2, but those are also common with Vedic. And these few are also common with Vedic mythology. Secondly, Iranian mythology has common elements only with Vedic mythology. Now, as per the theory, the Indo-Aryans and the Iranians came together from South Russia to Central Asia, and then from there they separated. So according to the Aryan Invasion Theory, when they left South Russia, Iranians and the Vedic Aryans were together. So whatever is the case with Vedic mythology should also be the case with Iranian mythology. But Iranian mythology has nothing in common with any of the other mythologies. It is only common with Vedic mythology. And secondly, Vedic myths are clearly close to the original forms. For example, now we know of Indra, Vayu, etc. as gods, but we know that Vayu represents the wind. We know Surya represents the sun. And the same gods are found in Greek mythology. Zeus, for example, Zeus Pitar, Zeus Pater. And in in the Rig Veda you find Zeus Pitar. And in Roman you find Jupiter. So, but those are fully gods. If you see Roman and Greek mythology, they are gods and all the stories are given. But in the Rig Veda you find that connection with the nature from which, natural myths from which this god has been derived. So, MacDonald points out that the Vedic gods are nearer to the physical phenomena which they represent than the gods of any other Indo-European mythology. That is, Vedic mythology represents the very primitive forms of the Proto-Indo-European mythology. So Vedic language and mythology clearly represent forms closest to the original and the primitive forms, in sharp contrast to the other Indo-European languages and mythologies. Now what does this show? This shows that the original homeland must either be identical with the area of the Rig Veda, or else it must be close enough to that area for the Rig Veda to have been composed after they left them. Suppose the Vedic people left the original homeland and came into the Sapta Sindhu area. So it should be reasonably close. But what is the actual theory, Aryan Invasion Theory? See, according to the theory, the ancestral language was spoken in or around South Russia. This had these 12 branches which I have mentioned: Anatolian, Tokharian, Italic, Celtic, Germanic, Baltic, Slavic, Albanian, Greek, Armenian, Iranian and Indo-Aryan. Now speakers of two of these dialects, Iranian and Indo-Aryan, separated from the others in South Russia, according to the theory, and they migrated eastwards towards Central Asia. During this centuries-long migration, they didn't migrate in one march in a few days. Over centuries they migrated and reached from South Russia to Central Asia. Now, during this migration in Hawksworth, they migrated slowly from one habitable area to the next, settling for a while, and in the process assimilating to the local population in terms of phenotype, culture and perhaps also religion. So which means that when the Vedic and Iranian people left South Russia, they settled down in various areas on the route, and everywhere they underwent ethnic, cultural and religious changes as they mixed with the different local populations. That is, ethnically also they got changed. They settled in a certain area, they got mixed with the local population, their race changed, they adopted their religious and cultural features. See here, now if this, suppose they originated somewhere here, now they slowly migrated here, like they came all the way here till Central Asia, and on this route they paused here, mixed with the local population, they paused here, mixed with the local population, and finally they settled down here in Central Asia, the Indo-Aryans and the Iranians. And after that, they migrated in two directions. They settled down here, and after that, the Iranians migrated southwards into Afghanistan, and the Vedic Aryans migrated into the Pakistan area. That is the Aryan Invasion Theory. What happened when they reached Central Asia? These racially and culturally much mixed speakers of Indo-Aryan and Iranian, now according to that theory, they got mixed with different populations on the way. Their language, their race, their mythology, everything got mixed. And then finally they migrated into southern Central Asia, and according to Witzel, they completely Aryanized the local population. That is, the people of that area of Central Asia were completely Aryanized, so that the local Bactrians seemed to be a typically Vedic people with a Vedic civilization. So what it means that in Central Asia, the people who had this Vedic culture were not really the original Vedic people who left South Russia. They were the local people who had adopted that culture from a much mixed population which came all the way, continuously getting mixed. Now, so these pre-Rig Vedic, they are not Vedic also, they are pre-Rig Vedic, because Rig Veda was composed after they entered India. So these pre-Rig Vedic Aryans in Central Asia were Aryanized local Central Asians. They were not the Aryans who came from South Russia. They were local people who were Aryanized, ethnically a completely different race from the original Indo-Aryan speakers who had set out from South Russia. That is the theory. Then these Aryanized ethnic Central Asians, later in Witzel's words, moved into the Punjab, assimilating, Aryanizing the local population. So again they entered the Punjab area and they Aryanized the local population. So again, there is no connection between these people and the Indo-Aryans who are supposed to have left South Russia. So note these circumstances. These immigrants were small groups of relatively primitive nomadic tribes who completely Aryanized the teeming multitudes of civilized people of the Indus-Harappan civilization. That is the theory. That a few Aryans entered from Central Asia into the Harappan area, and they completely Aryanized the millions of people who were staying in that area. So that those people who were not Aryans, they were speaking some other languages. They stopped speaking their languages, they stopped, left their religions, they left everything, and they adopted the language and the religion and culture of these few people who were migrating from Central Asia. This transformation was so complete that it resulted in, as Witzel puts it, the absorption of not only new languages, but also of an entire complex of material and spiritual culture, ranging from chariotry and horsemanship to Indo-Iranian poetry, whose complicated conventions are still actively used in the Rig Veda. The old Indo-Iranian religion centered on the opposition of Devas and Asuras was also adopted, along with Indo-European systems of ancestor worship. So this highly developed civilization of the Indus Valley suddenly gave up everything of theirs and adopted the culture and language and religion and ancestry of the few people who nomadic tribes who migrated from Central Asia. And this whole transformation left absolutely no trace in the archaeological or ethnic record or in traditional memory. This is the Aryan Invasion Theory. Does it make any sense? See, firstly, the Vedic Aryan of the greater Punjab region who composed the Rig Veda bore only a slight ethnic relationship to the Central Asians who Aryanized them, and almost none to the racially much mixed people who had Aryanized the Central Asians, and none at all to the original Indo-Aryans who had migrated from distant South Russia many centuries earlier. Secondly, as Kuiper points out, a long period elapsed between the arrival of the Aryans and the formation of the oldest hymns of the Rig Veda. In fact, so long a period that the locals had become completely Aryanized, and they had retained not even the faintest memories either of any indigenous pre-Aryan past or of any extra-Indian Aryan past. They didn't know anything about what was there in the past, either when they came from out or when they were staying there. So it is clearly impossible that these Vedic Aryans who composed the Rig Veda are so far removed in time, place, memory and ethnic identity from the original Indo-Aryans who left South Russia. How could they have composed the text, the Rig Veda, whose language and culture, even in its latest parts, is so very uniquely close to the roots and shoots of the supposed original Proto-Indo-European language and culture in South Russia? After getting mixed all the way and then changing their ethnic race and coming here, how could they have composed a text which shows the very roots of the Proto-Indo-European language of South Russia and the very roots of the Proto-Indo-European mythology of South Russia? So it is clearly implausible. And it is a theory, it is not supported by any evidence, it is just a theory which is not plausible. Now, according to us, the original Proto-Indo-European language must lie close to the Vedic area. Now, it is clear from the language, religion and mythology of the Rig Veda that it is impossible that this text could have been composed by anyone other than by people who are actually living in the area or who are just hot out of the original homeland. Neither alternative fits in with the above migration schedule from South Russia. Therefore, the original Proto-Indo-European language has to have been spoken in or around the historical Vedic area. In fact, Hawke is also a supporter of the Aryan Invasion Theory, but he admits that there can be two kinds of out-of-India theories. One is the Sanskrit origin theory, and second is the Proto-Indo-European in India theory. Now he accepts that the first Sanskrit theory is wrong because obviously Sanskrit was not the original language. But the Proto-Indo-European India hypothesis is not as easily refuted as the Sanskrit origin hypothesis, since it is not based on hardcore linguistic evidence which can be subjected to critical and definitive analysis. So arguments against the Indian homeland theory can't be based on linguistic evidence. They can only be based on arguments based on plausibility and simplicity. Now, as we saw, this full schedule of migration from South Russia to the Punjab region and then them composing the Rig Veda is not plausible and not simple. It is ridiculous. Second argument is it would be simpler to envisage only one migration into India of Indo-Aryan rather than a whole series of migration out of India of all the other languages. That is what Hawke says. He says if India was Aryan Invasion Theory, just talks about one branch of the 12 coming into India, whereas the out of India theory talks of 11 branches moving out of India. So he says that is simpler because one branch we can imagine going. Why will 11 branches move out? But this argument is wrong because wherever you put the homeland, even if you put the homeland in South Russia, even then that means that 11 branches moved out of that area. Wherever you put it, there is only one branch being spoken there. So obviously all the other 11 branches have moved out of. So how can you use that as an argument against the Indian theory? In fact, as per the linguistic analysts, see, linguists have studied the 12 branches. Now they don't know where the original homeland was, but they have certain criteria on the basis of which they have discovered from the original homeland which was the first branch to leave, which was the second branch to leave, and finally, according to them, five branches were remaining after all the others had left. They are Albanian, Greek, Armenian, Iranian, and Indo-Aryan were the last to remain in the homeland. So obviously, the homeland has to be in the area of these. It should either be in Albania or Greece or Armenia or Iran or India, because all the other branches had left. But if South Russia is the homeland, what it means is that all the 12 branches migrated out of South Russia. Because see, as per the linguist analysis, Slavic has already left the homeland. Only these five are remaining. So that means Slavic has already left the homeland. So if the homeland is in South Russia, that means Slavic also left, all the 12 branches left, and then Slavic came back and settled down, so that now you have Russian there. So obviously that is even more ridiculous, because they say that all 12 left and one came back, whereas any other theory will say that 11 left and one remained. So as he says, argument should be based on simplicity, and the simplicity thing says that the homeland should be in either of these five areas, not in South Russia. Is that as per Ghosh, quite a large number of these branches are crowded together in one small space of Europe. That is, in Europe you find so many branches: Germanic, Celtic, Baltic, Slavic, whereas in India you find only Indo-Aryan. So and also the Aryan languages are divided into two groups called Satem and Kentum. But Indo-Aryan is a Satem branch, whereas in Europe you find both Satem and Kentum branches. So they said that that is why it proves that the homeland must be in somewhere in Europe. But this argument became invalid after the discovery of the extinct Tokharian language to the north of Tibet, which is a Kentum branch. So now you have, in this area only, you have a Satem and Kentum branches. And secondly, recently, about 20 years ago, they discovered that one language in Uttarakhand called Bangani. It is a local language. So it was thought that it is like any other Indo-Aryan language. But now they have discovered that it is a Kentum language. It is which has got much mixed with Sanskrit. So here in India you find both Satem and Kentum languages. Actually, that is the very simplistic argument they had made earlier. But now, for example, a study carried out by Johanna Nichols and others from a Western university, they have published 2 detailed volumes in 1997, which has analyzed all the linguistic factors. And see, this is what they say: the structure of the family tree, the accumulation of genetic diversity at the western periphery of the range, the location of Tokharian and its implications for early dialect geography, the early attestation of Anatolia in Asia Minor, and the geography of the Kentum-Satem split all point in the same direction: a locus in western Central Asia, that is in Bactria Sogdiana. Bactria Sogdiana is the area above Afghanistan. I already showed the map in which they came from South Russia and settled down in Central Asia. Now that is the area from which all the European branches are supposed to have migrated to the areas, according to this latest study. Now another argument is, there are many strongest single argument against the Indian homeland is that the whole of South India and some parts of North India too are to this day Aryan in speech. They say if India was the original homeland, how is it still there are non-Aryan languages in South India and the eastern parts? So they say that those were the original languages and the Aryans came from outside. However, Britain is the homeland of the English language. No one denies that the English language originated in England. But now it is spoken all over North America, Australia, New Zealand. And in England you find non-English languages like Irish, Welsh, Cornish and Scots Gaelic. So can you from this say that England is not the home of the English language? Obviously not. So this argument is very foolish. And South Russia, where they are trying to put the homeland, it also has Uralic, Altaic and Caucasian languages belonging to other families in the same area. So obviously that same argument rules out South Russia also as a homeland. And formerly Brahui, a Dravidian language, a small this thing is found in Baluchistan. All the other Dravidian languages are in the south. But in Baluchistan in Pakistan you find a small tribe speaking a language called Brahui. Formerly it was treated as proof. See, there were Dravidians all over North India and the Aryans came from outside and pushed them to the south. So these are the last remaining remnants of the Dravidians. But now, this thing has shown, and it is admitted even by Witzel and other scholars, it has been explained by a late migration that took place within this millennium, that the Brahui people migrated from the south to the north. So it is not that they are original northerners who are pushed to the south by invading Aryans. And in fact, now the fact that there are Dravidian, Munda, etc. languages in India does not prove that India is not the original homeland. Just as the fact that there are Irish, Welsh, Scottish in England does not prove that England is not the homeland of English. So what is the criterion? If there are other language families in the area, what is the criterion by which you can decide whether this came from out or is local? Now, Witzel refers to the well-known conservatism of river names, which helps to identify earlier inhabitants. That is, today if you go to America, no Red Indian language is spoken there, everyone speaks English, or the other people who have migrated from other parts of the world. But the majority of the rivers of the USA have Red Indian names. Mississippi, Massachusetts, the names of the states, the name of the cities, Oklahoma, these are not English words which have been taken there. They are Mississippi, Missouri, Wisconsin, all these are Red Indian words which have still been written. That is, the original names of the rivers do not change. In any area, those rivers continue to remain the same, the names. For example, we find all these, for example, Chicago, Idaho, Ohio, Iowa, Missouri. In England, all places ending in Don, Chester, Tonham, Wick, etc. are pre-English names. This includes even London, for example, Manchester, Winchester, all these names are pre-English names. But Witzel admits in South Asia, relatively few pre-Indo-Aryan names of places survive in the north, but there are many more in central and southern India. Now actually when he says relatively few place names, no one has been able to find a single place name in the north which is either Dravidian or anything else. He says many more in central and southern India, obviously because still Dravidian languages are spoken in the south, so you will find Dravidian place names there. In the east you find Munda and Santali and other languages being spoken, so obviously you will find Munda and Santali names there. But you don't find in Punjab, Rajasthan, Maharashtra, Gujarat, you don't find Dravidian and Munda names, place names. But most important is the river names, because the river names remain for thousands of years. Take for example Europe itself, not just America. America, we know that the Europeans went there 300 years ago. But see Europe, river names are found to reflect the languages spoken before the influx of Indo-European speaking populations. They are older than 4500 to 2500 BC. That is, all the rivers of Europe, Germany, France, England, they are non-Indo-European names. They reflect the names of earlier inhabitants of those areas. So you see, there you have proof that the Indo-European Aryan languages of Europe are not native to that area. They came from outside, because the river names are non-Aryan. Whereas, and this is Witzel's writing, in northern India, rivers in general have early Sanskrit names from the Vedic period and names from the daughter languages of Sanskrit later on. This is surprising in the area once occupied by the Indus civilization, where one would have expected the survival of older names, as has been the case in Europe and the Near East. So you see, when they see some fact, they don't derive the conclusion from it, they're just surprised. He finds it surprising. Now the obvious logic should be that Aryans did not come from outside. Now European names, even today, for over 4500 years, they have still retained non-Indo-European, non-Aryan names. Whereas in the Rig Veda, which is at the very least over 3000 years old, even by the Western scholars dating, even in the Rig Veda, you don't find all the areas of the Indus and Vedic area are Aryan names. They are not Dravidian or Munda or any other this thing. Now the Indus Valley civilization is one of the greatest civilizations of the world. If it was a non-Aryan civilization, then all the rivers, it was in a river area, the area of the Sapta Sindhu. Now all those rivers should have had Dravidian names or Munda names or Semitic names or whatever language was spoken there. But you find all of them have Sanskrit names even in the Rig Veda. So this obviously proves that they did not have any earlier names. This is the area of the Rigvedic people. You just contrast the distinction that today in Europe there is no trace of any non-Aryan language. If you go to Germany, Britain, all the languages of Europe are Aryan. The only languages which are non-Aryan are Finnish and Hungarian to the east. Whereas to the west, all the languages are Aryan languages. But the river names, even after 4500 years, still give testimony to the fact that earlier there were non-Aryans there. Whereas in the area of the Rigveda, that is the Punjab, Haryana, etc. Even in the oldest text, you find only Aryan names, you don't find pre-Aryan names. This is absolute proof that the Indus and the Vedic area had never been non-Indo-European in speech. See, this is proof, whatever proof arguments they give, that there are other language families in India and all, when you really examine those things, you find actually it proves that India is the original area. The Uralic or Finno-Ugrian language, as I said, there are two languages of Europe which are not Aryan, Finnish and Hungarian. They are known as the Finno-Ugrian or Uralic languages. They are found in Eastern Europe. Now, there are Indo-Iranian words in these languages. There are words which have been borrowed from Sanskrit and Iranian in these languages. The earliest layer of Indo-Iranian, and see the number of words, means every field of cultural activity, they have borrowed words from Sanskrit and Iranian. For example, domestic animals, sheep, ram, camel, stallion, colt, piglet, calf. Then pastoral processes, skin, wool, cloth, farming words, tools, metal, word for ladder, social relations like man, sister, orphan, and words, Vedic and Iranian words like dasa, asura, heaven, the netherworld, God, happiness, vajra, dead, mortal, kidney, ecstatic drinks used by the Iranian priests, honey, hemp and fly agaric. This is a list of words borrowed by Finnish and Hungarian from Sanskrit and Iranian. Now, what is the argument by Western scholars? This proves that the Indo-Iranian people were there in Eastern Europe and they came to India. And because they were there in Eastern Europe, these languages have borrowed, because these languages have never been known to be around India. They were always in Eastern Europe. So this is the argument. This is one of the arguments to show that the Indo-Iranians came from Europe. But this massive evidence of contacts between the Indo-Iranian and the Uralic languages is treated as evidence that the Indo-Iranians stayed for some time in the Uralic areas east of Europe on their way to Central Asia, thence to India and Iran. But in fact, it is the strongest possible evidence to the exact opposite. Because firstly, Sanskrit has borrowed from every language, and anyone who has studied Sanskrit, they claim that they have borrowed words from Dravidian, Munda, everything. But all these borrowings are only from Indo-Aryan and Iranian to Uralic, to Finnish and Hungarian. Linguists have searched and searched to find even a single borrowing which Sanskrit or Iranian has borrowed from Finnish and Hungarian, but they have not found a single word of that kind. Whereas there is a mass of Sanskrit and Iranian words in Finnish and Hungarian. Now, borrowings always take place in both directions, and Sanskrit itself is known to have borrowed or absorbed foreign words in every situation. English, you know, has borrowed so many words from every language. African, Malaysian, Indian, Hindi words have been borrowed. Red Indian words have been borrowed. This is so even in the case of powerful immigrant groups in a colonial situation. Thus, for example, English words entered languages all over the world. But English as spoken by English colonialists in different parts of the world also borrowed heavily from the local languages all over the world. And since these colonists were still part of England, they produced popular literature in England, and many of these words were used by them, and those words entered the Indian language, the English language. There are so many Indian words that you know, which are there in English. The only situation where such words, there is no two-way borrowing, there is only one-way borrowing. That happens when immigrant groups do not transmit the words back. Like English people went all over the world. The English words were borrowed by all those people, and the English people borrowed all those words from them. Then they went back to England and wrote books in which they used those words, so those words have entered the English language. But suppose they had not gone back. For example, medieval Arabic and Turkish invaders and immigrants in India, they came to India. Now all our Indian languages have borrowed so many Arabic words, Turkish words. But those people also, when staying in India, they borrowed so many words from our local languages. But they did not go back to Arabia and Turkey with those words. So in Turkey and Arabia, you don't find these Indian words. Similarly, 18th century Indian immigrants into Fiji, Mauritius and Suriname. There are people who left India 2 centuries ago and stayed in these countries. Now they still speak Hindi of the kind which was spoken here 2 centuries ago. In their Hindi, they don't only speak Hindi which is 2 centuries old, they also use words which are borrowed from the languages of Fiji, Mauritius and Suriname. And similarly, the people of Fiji, Mauritius and Suriname have borrowed Hindi words from them. But these people did not come back to India and write books in Hindi so that these words entered the Hindi language. So you don't find Fiji, Mauritius and Suriname words in our Hindi. You find it only in the Hindi spoken by them there. Similarly, Sanskrit in Southeast Asia, you know, the biggest Hindu temple in the world is not in India. It is in Cambodia, the Angkor Wat temple. You find Hindu temples all over Cambodia, Burma, Thailand in ancient times. And if you see, all of you must be knowing how all those countries of Southeast Asia have borrowed countless Sanskrit words. And they did not come to India and borrow those words. We know that there were Indian immigrants there who settled down, and those Indian immigrants also obviously borrowed words from those local languages. But in Sanskrit you don't find any Thai words, Malaysian words, Cambodian words, because those people did not come back. So this proves that this one-way borrowing of Indo-Aryan words into Uralic is not because Indo-Aryans came from there, but because one group of Indo-Aryans went from here and settled down in the Uralic areas, and the Uralic people borrowed from that. And that is the only logical linguistic conclusion. And the clinching evidence is, one of the words which are borrowed is, the name and cult of the Bactrian camel were borrowed by the Finno-Ugric speakers from the Indo-Iranians in ancient times. Now the Bactrian camel is the camel of Central Asia. Now if the Indo-Aryans and Iranians came from East Europe to India, how will the Finnish and Hungarian people borrow this camel word from them? Obviously it is people who went from Central Asia to Eastern Europe who carried this word, the name of the Bactrian camel. Bactrian camel, as you know, is different from the Arabic camel. It has two humps, and it is a different animal. The name of the Bactrian camel could have obviously only have been borrowed from Indo-Iranians moving from Bactria to the west, not from those coming from that direction. And now this is another very common argument. The Proto-Indo-European plants and animals are those of the temperate climate. Thus, for example, you find words like for wolf, snow, bear, fox, cow, horse, etc., which are common. For example, Sanskrit cow, English cow and Sanskrit go, or Sanskrit ashva and Lithuanian ashva. So you know that all these words are related. But all these words show memories of a colder climate according to them. If Aryans had gone from India to the west, why don't they take names, why do in Europe you don't find names for lion, tiger, elephant, leopard, lotus, bamboo, or some local Indian trees? If they had gone from here, they should have taken some of these words with them. That is the argument made by Witzel. But he says you don't find these words in Europe. So that proves that the Aryans didn't go from India. Now, this is clearly a fake set of arguments. Because see, any people who go and settle in another area, they will lose the words for the animals which are not in that area. Suppose in ancient times some Australians had come, Australian tribals had come from Australia and settled down in Maharashtra. Would they have retained a word for the kangaroo? Because there is no kangaroo in Maharashtra, they would have lost that word. So similarly, and this is argued by Witzel himself. See, words in wolf and snow, because see what Witzel says. Now there are some plants which are found in Europe, which are not found in India, and you don't find their names in Sanskrit also. So he says, because their names have not been used any longer and have died out. Now obviously the same rule applies to the Indians who migrated from India to Europe. Obviously, since there were no tigers and lions and elephants in Europe, they stopped using those words. And we have the living example of the Gypsy language. Now everyone admits it is officially an Indo-Aryan language. They left India around 1000 years ago. And they have not preserved a single name of any Indian plant, animal or geographical climatic feature peculiar to India. Obviously, because when these things are not there, how will they preserve the words? And no one denies that the Gypsies went from India. So the other Indo-European languages migrated thousands of years ago during the pre-formative and formative stages of the ancestral speech forms. And they developed their common Indo-European characteristics outside the northwest of India, where the Gypsies went from deep inside India, just 1000 years ago. If the Gypsies have not preserved these words, why should these ancient people why should we suppose that they should have preserved these words? And now Witzel adds a fraudulent argument. He says the Gypsies have taken Indian words with them. And what are the words he gives? Pral, brother, and Pani, water, and Karal, he does. Now these are not Indian words, they are not the names of Indian plants and animals. Brother, water, and he does. They are general words. And even in Sanskrit and Latin you will find common words for this. For example, the Gypsies have preserved words like Pral and Pani. But English has also preserved words for brother and water. For example, Sanskrit Bhratar or Sinhalese word for water is Vatura. So you see, England has also preserved these words. But English has not preserved words for lion, tiger, elephant, leopard, lotus, bamboo, and nor has the gypsy language. So it is the same case, but he is giving it fakely as if it is a different case and that gypsy languages have preserved these words. And the amazing thing is that actually they should not have preserved words, but actually the European languages have, in spite of this, they have preserved certain emigrant Indian words, which Witzel is not mentioning. For example, leopard, Sanskrit pridaku, Greek pardos, from which you get leopard, and Hittite parsanas. That second, ape, Sanskrit kapi and Greek kapos. Apes are not found in Europe, but the Greeks took this word with them. And most of all, elephant. He says that they have not preserved words for elephant, but in fact they have, because Sanskrit ibha, Greek iphas. Ipha is exactly equivalent to ibha because Sanskrit bh becomes ph in Greek, and Latin ebur, that is ivory. Finally, camel, this Central Asian camel, that also names have been preserved by Tokharian, Old Slavic, Lithuanian, Old German, and Hittite. Now, all these words are taken by Gamkrelidze, who gives all these words. He claims that Aryans originated in Turkey, but none of these animals are found in Turkey. They are all found in India, and the camel is found in Central Asia. So they can only have been taken by people migrating from India through Central Asia to Europe. Another thing is they claim cerebral sounds and words borrowed from Dravidian, Austric, and other non-Indo-European Indian languages. For example, in Sanskrit you find many words which are borrowed from Dravidian, from Munda, and you find cerebral sounds like the distinction between ta, tha, da, dha, and ta, tha, da, dha. That ta, tha, da, dha are known as cerebral sounds. You find them in all Indian languages, and you find them in Dravidian languages, but you don't find them in European languages. So what this Witzel claims is that if those people had left from India, they should have also had cerebral sounds. But even though gypsies don't have cerebral sounds, so you see, when they are arguing, they argue haphazardly. They think we'll just blindly accept whatever they're saying without applying logic to it. Now, no one denies, Witzel least of all denies that the Romani or gypsy migrated from India. And yet the same thing is there for the Romani as for the earlier Indo-European. So this can't be an argument saying that they did not go from India. This is a further finer argument of his. He says that the old Avestan of Zarathustra is frequently even more archaic than the Rig Veda. Now, what this argument is, the original Proto-Indo-European has been reconstructed. Now, wherever that had S, in Iranian it has become H, whereas Sanskrit has preserved S. So Sanskrit is closer to the original, but in some certain other features, Iranian is closer to the original. Now, obviously, this will be the case because there were 12 branches, and different branches have preserved different original this thing. So this is not an argument. Now, all these arguments are directed against the Sanskrit origin hypothesis. That is, if it is not found in Sanskrit, why is it found in that language? But Sanskrit was not the original language. The original language was Proto-Indo-European, and that had those features. Now, again, Witzel gives an argument. He says, he gives an example of a word, beaver. Beaver is found in Iran and all the way to Europe, but it is not found in India. And all the words are related. In Sanskrit, the word babru is used for the mongoose, whereas there it is used for the beaver. So what they claim is that originally the word was used for the beaver, but when the Aryans came to India, they transferred the word to the mongoose. However, all the other linguists admit that the Sanskrit word is the original. Sanskrit shows the older situation while Avestan displays the innovation. So obviously when all the Aryans were migrating out of India, in Iran, this word was transferred from mongoose to beaver. Now in sum, this is the total sum of the linguistic argument. There is no other linguistic argument beyond what I have shown. Now, as it is pointed out, this is based not on hardcore linguistic evidence, but only on arguments based on plausibility and simplicity, on the basis of which they claim that India is not the original homeland and that the Aryans came from out. But when we examine them in detail, we actually get opposite proof. For example, the evidence of the river names in North India, the evidence of the one-way Uralic borrowings, how Finno-Ugrian have borrowed from Sanskrit and Iranian, and the evidence of the Indian animal names in the European languages. So when we examine the arguments, we find the opposite proof. We find that they went out from India. Now the linguistic case for the Aryan invasion theory is completely flawed and fallacious. There is no this thing at all. They see, it is admitted by this, for Erdosy, for example, that the whole study of the Indian languages has been converted into a search for finding evidence for the external origins of Indo-Aryan languages. So that is a motivated study by which they study the Sanskrit language. But as they admit, there is nothing at all in the Rig Veda which shows any memory of external origins. Now what I have done is just the linguistic arguments. These, as you said, are the arguments for the Aryan invasion theory. Now there are the textual arguments and the archaeological arguments, and when you examine them, you again find more proof. But when you examine the arguments for the out of India theory, there are three sets of arguments: the chronological, textual, and linguistic. And those arguments are so detailed and so final that they completely prove, they unchallengeably prove that India was the original homeland of the Aryan languages. Now, after this talk, at least if you have understood what the Aryan invasion theory is about, what is the question of Aryans, it is not based on some historical record. It is based only on the fact that the languages of North India are related to the languages of Europe. It is on the basis of this linguistic fact that this whole theory has been reconstructed.